I think the Chileans are just as sensitive as any other people to celebrities, but at that time, I think, as I wrote, at that time, the 1980s, 1981, very few people knew about him, about my father, and Chile had been in the Allende government. Chile had been very political. It's a very political country, so they know a lot about politics and they know a lot about politicians. And politicians all over the world: José Lebre, Castro, Che Guevara, Nixon, Kissinger, those people. Only writers knew about Norman, and I wasn't close to any of the writers then. Donoso, by the way, was not in Chile. He was in Spain. He came back, I think, in 1982. But I was in the middle of having children, and I just wasn't very much. I wasn't having an active social life with the important Chilean people. So I surrounded myself with friends, with family. But to answer your question, for Chileans, to be famous is very important. But I don't think it's more important than it is for an American. I think it's pretty much the same, except that when somebody goes to Chile, especially after Pinochet, because during Pinochet nobody went to Chile except for the Pope, Pope John Paul. Nobody else went. And he was a rock star when he went. But nobody else went because it was, as Dad, said, he didn't want to be associated with going to Chile during the Pinochet regime. So after that, I remember right after Pinochet, right after Elwin, the first president after Pinochet was elected, a big rock star went to Chile and had. What's his name? I forgot right now. He had a rock concert in a huge stadium. It was packed. And it was like everybody was celebrating that this guy had finally come. And after that, now everybody goes to Chile, so it's not such a big deal. I don't know if I answered your question. I should have rambled on. Yeah?
As an American living in Chile at that time, was it perhaps awkward that perhaps the pro-Pinochet Chileans were perhaps friendlier to you, and that the pro-Allende Chileans might have felt just some resentment because of your Americanness and the American role in helping Pinochet come to power?
Yes, you're right about that. When I went to the psychiatric hospital, for example, the people that I met, the psychiatrists and the psychologists, they were very friendly. But when they found out that I was American, I could feel a certain tension, because they would think, well, what is she doing here? Why is she here? Why is she coming here? Why would anybody come to Chile during the Pinochet government? But when they found out who my husband was, who was well known, then the ice dissolved. So yes, it was difficult for people who were against Pinochet to understand what I was doing there, and people who were pro-Pinochet loved me, because I was American, so they loved me. They just took it for granted that I would be very happy to be there and very happy to be with them, which wasn't the case. Mm-hmm. Yeah?
How old were you when you first read your father's work, and what did you read?
I was 15 when I read The Naked and the Dead, and then I was 16 when I read An American Dream.
What was your impression?
Well, I loved The Naked and the Dead. I was very impressed by the book. I forgot my father had written it and enjoyed it immensely, and I thought it was a very good book. I didn't feel the same way about An American Dream. I think I was too young to read it, and so I was very uncomfortable with all the sexual scenes and all the violence. And I read it once, and I've never read it again. Yeah, David?
Susan, I read The Naked and the Dead when I was 12 years old.
12? Well, you beat me.
This way. I think I did.
Yeah.
I can remember sitting back in the back row of an English class with a teacher that was very inspirational to me in terms of my wanting to read and write. And he made, basically instilled in me a desire to write. How did I come across The Naked and the Dead? It was in a paperback book rack in a drugstore. And I brought it home, I read it, and I was fascinated with war at that time. What boy wasn't in the 50s, in the late 50s? And we had our toy soldiers and everything, and I can remember sitting in the back of that English class, remembering what I read that Norma wrote about the opening pages of the landing craft, and I saw pictures of it, and I would get deeper in it. And obviously we didn't have cell phones back then. I didn't watch a lot of television, and I started to copy what he wrote. And I got my inspiration from reading him, and to write from reading him and writing what he wrote. It almost sounds Jonesy in my point is that I'm going to read forward now. I got to know your father from what I read of his works. When I got involved with the Norman Mailer Society, and I got closer to him. And reading passages of your memoir, I'm not a memoir reader, but you opened up so much about your relationship with your father that I got to know another side of him that I never knew existed. I mean, this was the first time that I read of a child writing about a very famous person and revealing so much. What were some of the more difficult passages that you encountered in trying to get down on paper? Or were there?
Oh, there were quite a few. I think the most difficult one was about the stabbing, because even though I had been in analysis I was in analysis for 10 years, which, by the way, is a reason that most people say you're so compassionate with your father and you're so compassionate with the life that you had and you bring understanding, etc. Well, that's thanks to my analysis. I'm not angry, I'm not resentful, and I think that's one of the great things that analysis does, is that it really helps you to work through these kinds of very difficult relationships. Anyway, that was an aside. The stabbing, even though I was in analysis for 10 years, I never really talked about it. I mean, deeply. I skimmed over it. I said, well, it was when my father stabbed Adele, and why does everybody ask me if my mother was the one who was stabbed? And so I would always skim over it. We never went into it deeply, and for some reason, my analyst never asked me to go into it. But when I started writing about it, I had to go deeper. And I realized a lot of things then, and it was very difficult for me to write. One, I realized that I had been afraid of my father, which I knew that I had been afraid of him all my life, except for the last 20 years. But when I was a child after the stabbing, I was afraid of him. And I thought it was because he drank a lot, and because he was, he would get this mean look in his eye, and he would be so intense, and I would just sort of run away from him. But it had to do with the stabbing, because if he had stabbed Adele, whom I cared about, what else could he do? I was ashamed of him also. I felt shame. I was not only ashamed of him, but I felt shame for having a father that had done this. And we were never able to forget it, because he was so famous that it always kept popping up. So I think that was one of the hardest chapters to write, and I always say that was my second analysis, my writing this memoir, because I did it alone, and I wouldn't have been able to do it if I hadn't had an analysis before. That was one hard chapter. The other chapter that was very hard, oddly enough, you won't believe it, was the Chile chapter, because when I was writing it, I kept thinking, why the hell did I stay here? Why didn't I just pick up Valentina and tell Marco, listen, either you come with me or we split up and I'm leaving. So I went to Marco and I said, can you explain to me why why we stayed in this hot, god-awful country at the end of the world that was so horrible and gray and depressing? And he reminded me of all the good things that we had, like what I wrote about, that we felt part of a group, we had friends, we felt like we were doing something that was important. I knew later on that he was doing things that he felt were important, but I had no idea. And I felt that we were part of that we were all comrades in the fight against Pinochet. Also, I was having children, and so it wasn't easy to pick up and go. But that was a very hard chapter to write.
Well, just one more question.
Yeah.
What was the most tender moment that you had with your father?
I had many tender moments with him, but I think the one that I still get teary-eyed and all choked up about is when he was very, very sick. He knew he was probably going to die soon, and we had gone to see him in Provincetown with Marco, and I went up to say goodbye to him, and he said, I'm so glad you came for this week. It really meant a lot to me, but I wanted to talk to you about something else. And he said, you know, you're the oldest, and this family is a great tapestry, and I want you to take care it doesn't unravel. And I just burst into tears, and I said, oh, Daddy, I'm so sad, I'm so sad. And he knew what I was talking about, and I hadn't called him Daddy since I was like a little girl. And he said, it's okay, Sue. I'm okay with this. I'm okay. So go now. Go. Yeah.
Is Chile less gray now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a completely different country. It's in the world now. Yes. It's you know, it's called it shouldn't be called that, but it's called the Tiger of Latin America because it has the best economy of Latin America. And it has gone up in the last 2 decades. It's gotten very modernized. People want to invest in Chile. Businessmen want to invest in Chile. Artists want to go to Chile. People write about Chile. So it's not gray anymore at all. Bonnie?
Yeah, in the memoir you write about one of the positive influences for you in college was Kate Millett.
That's right.
And she was working on Second Sex. Did you ever go back and talk to her about Norman? Did she know you were Norman's daughter?
Oh, I'm sure she did.
Okay.
I never asked her. Actually, let me think about it. Actually, I met Kate again in Mexico. I didn't write about it because I just didn't have enough, I was going to say time, but I just felt that it was getting away from the subject.
Yes.
But she was my teacher for a semester. I was close to her. I was very grateful to her. And then when I was working at a television station, I was working for a cultural program, and they invited Dad and a couple of other people, and then they invited Kate Millett. And so I hosted her in in Mexico, and we talked about. And I asked her, and she said, "I knew, but I didn't let it influence me," which I'm not so sure that really happened. But I had no idea she was writing sexual politics, and she was a great teacher. Nicole?
Did you feel betrayed when sexual politics came in?
No, I didn't feel betrayed. I was surprised. Oh, my teacher. Kate, she wrote this? She hates my father? I didn't know. Yeah. I was surprised more than betrayed.
Should have asked her why she changed all those quotes.
I didn't,
That's what I always wanted to ask her.
yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Sue.
Well, thank you.